It started with a sound no one was supposed to hear, a man's voice trembling, confessing to something unthinkable, words that would shatter a community and expose a darkness hiding behind the facade of normalcy. On a cold October evening in 2018, the small town of Fairview, Oregon, population 8,742, became the epicenter of one of the most disturbing murder cases in modern America. A case so bizarre that people initially refused to believe it was real, convinced it must be elaborate fiction, until the body was found and the truth became undeniable. The voice belonged to 32-year-old Daniel Reeves, a local mechanic at Fairview Auto Repair, a devoted father of 2 young daughters, soccer coach on weekends, the kind of neighbor who waved from his driveway and helped jumpstart your car in winter, or so everyone thought, because beneath that carefully constructed persona lurked something monstrous, a rage so violent it would culminate in murder and a confession that literally no one was meant to hear. But the tape that would later break the internet, racking up 47 million views in its first week and spawning countless documentaries, wasn't meant for anyone's ears. It was a private purging, a twisted confessional spoken into the void, perhaps Daniel's way of processing what he'd done or maybe his subconscious desire to be caught. Psychologists would debate this endlessly. It was discovered accidentally by Leah Monroe, a 28-year-old podcaster and true crime enthusiast from Portland who ran a moderately successful show called Cold Case Chronicles, which had approximately 15,000 loyal listeners before this discovery catapulted her into international fame and, later, into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Leah had been searching for authentic vintage audio equipment for an episode about 1980s cold cases when she stumbled into Harbor Thrift, a cluttered secondhand shop on the outskirts of Fairview, the kind of place where dust particles dance in afternoon sunlight and forgotten objects pile high on creaking shelves, each with its own untold story. She bought a Sony TCM 200DV cassette recorder for $12, drawn to its retro aesthetic and the satisfying mechanical click of its buttons, imagining it would add authentic ambience to her podcast production, never suspecting it contained audio that would change her life forever. Back in her home studio that evening, October 19, 2018, while her boyfriend Josh watched Netflix in the living room, Leah plugged in the recorder, adjusted her headphones, and pressed play, expecting silence or perhaps fragments of forgotten music, someone's old wedding vows, maybe a child's recital, anything but what actually emerged from the speakers. Instead of the soft hum of old music, she heard Daniel's voice, instantly recognizable as male, mid-30s, trembling with emotion, whispering through waves of static. "I didn't mean to kill her. It just happened so fast. Oh God, what have I done?" Leah froze, her finger hovering over the stop button, her breath catching in her throat as the full weight of what she was hearing crashed over her like ice water. The tape crackled with heavy breathing, the sound of someone crying in short, choked sobs, and then Daniel continued, his voice gaining a horrifying steadiness as he recounted every detail of the murder with the precision of someone who had replayed the moment countless times in his mind. The argument that escalated, the wrench in his hand, the sickening sound of impact, the way Amanda's eyes went wide with shock and then fear, her attempts to crawl away, the second blow that silenced her forever. "There was so much blood," he whispered, "more than I thought possible. It pooled under the workbench, and I just stood there watching it spread, thinking this can't be real, this can't be happening." What started as curiosity turned into terror as Leah listened to the 18-minute recording in its entirety, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone when she finally called 911 at 11:47 p.m., her voice barely above a whisper as she told the dispatcher, "I think I just heard a murder confession, a real one." The 911 operator, thinking it might be a prank or someone confused about fiction versus reality, it happened occasionally with true crime fans, nevertheless dispatched Officer Marcus Chin to Leah's apartment to assess the situation. When Chin arrived and listened to just 30 seconds of the tape, his expression transformed from skeptical annoyance to grave concern, and within an hour, Leah found herself at Fairview Police Station being interviewed by Detective Sarah Hartwell, a 15-year veteran who had seen her share of disturbing cases but nothing quite like this. Leah immediately provided the tape and all information about where she'd purchased the recorder, her hands still trembling as detectives made copies and began the process of voice analysis and authentication. Local authorities initially assumed it was a prank, Perhaps an elaborate piece of performance art or even a scene from an unreleased film. Fairview was close enough to Portland that amateur filmmakers sometimes used the area, but the deeper they dug, the more chilling it became, because every detail Daniel mentioned in his confession could be verified, every location he referenced existed, and most disturbing of all, the case matched a missing person report filed just 3 days earlier. Daniel's wife, Amanda Reeves, 31 years old, former high school art teacher turned full-time mother, with long auburn hair and a warm smile that neighbors remembered fondly, had been missing for 3 days when the tape surfaced. Friends initially thought she'd gone to visit her sister Rachel in Spokane, Washington, a trip Amanda mentioned making soon during a coffee date with her book club the previous week, but her phone had been off since she supposedly left home, which struck some as odd but not alarming enough to immediately suspect foul play. Amanda's sister Rachel, when contacted by police, expressed confusion and growing panic. "Amanda never came here, we hadn't even finalized plans yet. Where is she? Where's my sister?" The last confirmed sighting of Amanda alive was on October 12th at 4:30 p.m., when she picked up her daughters from Fairview Elementary School, waving to other parents, discussing an upcoming bake sale, appearing completely normal, unaware she had less than 5 hours to live. Detectives Sarah Hartwell and her partner, Detective James Morrison, obtained a search warrant within 12 hours of the tape's discovery and arrived at the Reeves residence at dawn on October 20th, a modest 2-story colonial-style home at the end of Maple Street, painted pale yellow with white shutters, a carefully maintained lawn, children's bikes on the porch, the picture of suburban normalcy that made what they would find inside all the more disturbing. Neighbors recalled frequent arguments coming from the house in recent months, muffled shouting behind closed windows usually late at night, the kind of domestic discord people notice but rarely intervene in, assuming it's none of their business, until it's too late and they're being interviewed by police, expressing the universal regret of, "I should have said something." Inside the garage, a detached structure behind the main house where Daniel worked on personal vehicle projects and stored his professional tools, police discovered a dark stain on the concrete floor beneath a pile of automotive equipment, wrenches, socket sets, oil pans, deliberately arranged as if someone hoped to conceal what lay beneath, and a faint but unmistakable smell of bleach, the sharp chemical odor that immediately raises red flags in any investigation. The stain measured approximately 2 feet in diameter, its edges suggesting attempts to clean or dilute it, but blood is remarkably difficult to fully erase, especially from porous concrete, a fact that would prove Daniel's undoing. When confronted during initial questioning, Daniel remained eerily calm, almost too calm, displaying what psychologists later called inappropriate affect. His voice steady as he insisted Amanda left after an argument about finances, claiming she took her car and said she needed space to think, a story he'd apparently rehearsed multiple times, making it sound almost plausible. "We fought about credit card debt," Daniel told detectives, maintaining eye contact, his posture relaxed in the interrogation room, showing none of the anxiety innocent people typically display when their spouse is missing. "She got angry, packed a bag, and left around 10 p.m. I assumed she went to her sister's place. I figured she'd call when she cooled down." But forensic teams soon confirmed that the stain in the garage was blood, type A positive, Amanda's blood type, and DNA tests would definitively match Amanda within 48 hours, though the absence of a body meant prosecutors faced significant challenges building a murder case. Still, there was no body, and without one, even with the tape and blood evidence, convicting someone of murder remained difficult, until the tape was authenticated by 3 independent audio forensic experts who confirmed it was genuine, unedited, and recorded on the specific device found in Daniel's possession. Investigators painstakingly enhanced the audio using state-of-the-art forensic technology at the Oregon State Crime Lab, revealing chilling details that painted a vivid picture of that horrific night. The sound of metal scraping against concrete, likely the wrench being picked up, a muffled thud that made even seasoned detectives wince, understanding immediately what it represented. Water running continuously for several minutes, suggesting cleanup attempts. The rustling of plastic, possibly garbage bags or tarp, and Daniel muttering throughout, sometimes to himself, sometimes as if speaking to Amanda's corpse. "She wouldn't stop screaming. I had to make her stop. Why couldn't she just listen to me? Between confessional statements, Daniel could be heard crying, hyperventilating, once even vomiting, the sounds of a man confronting what he'd become, yet still calculating enough to record his confession and later hide the evidence. Experts confirmed that the recording was genuine and made on the very Sony recorder found in Daniel's workshop, matched by the device's unique electronic signature and slight mechanical defect that created a distinctive background hum. Detectives pieced together a grim timeline through a combination of the tape, witness statements, phone records, and digital forensics. On the night of October 12th, around 8:30 p.m. after the girls were asleep, Daniel and Amanda had argued in the garage, ostensibly about finances but actually triggered when Amanda discovered he was having an affair with Jessica Torres, a 26-year-old co-worker at the auto shop, evidence of which she'd found in text messages on Daniel's phone that afternoon when it accidentally synced to their home computer. The argument escalated rapidly from accusatory to vicious. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices around 8:45 p.m., then an abrupt silence that, in retrospect, felt ominous. According to Daniel's own tape confession, Amanda threatened to leave him, take the children, expose the affair to his family and employer, threats that triggered something dark in Daniel, a rage he later claimed he couldn't control but which prosecutors argued was cold-blooded murder when he deliberately picked up the wrench and struck her. "I saw red," Daniel said on the tape. "Everything just went black, and when I could see again, she was on the ground, bleeding, looking up at me like she didn't know who I was anymore, and maybe she was right." Rage turned to violence in an instant that would destroy multiple lives forever, and Daniel struck her with a 3-pound torque wrench, the blow connecting with the left side of her skull with such force that Amanda collapsed immediately, perhaps already unconscious, though Daniel's confession suggested she remained aware for several terrible minutes. Realizing what he'd done, seeing Amanda bleeding on his garage floor, Daniel panicked, but not in the way an innocent person might panic. Instead, his mind went to cover-up, to disposal, to erasing evidence, a calculated response that suggested premeditation or at least rapid criminal thinking. He recorded himself confessing, perhaps as a form of twisted relief, a way to externalize the guilt that threatened to consume him, speaking into the recorder as if it were a priest in a confessional, seeking absolution that would never come. The recording captured Daniel's mental state deteriorating in real time. "I have to fix this. I can't let anyone know. The girls, oh God, the girls can't find out their father is a monster." He described wrapping Amanda's body in a tarp from his workshop, the blue waterproof kind used for covering outdoor equipment, and loading her into the trunk of his truck around midnight when Maple Street was dark and silent, his movements methodical despite his emotional breakdown. He buried Amanda's body in a wooded area 10 miles from town, in a remote section of Willow Creek State Forest where he and Amanda had once hiked during happier times, an irony not lost on investigators. He buried her in a place they'd shared joy, now transformed into her unmarked grave. Daniel returned to his life as if nothing happened, tucking his daughters into bed when they woke briefly at 2 a.m., making them breakfast the next morning, smiling and answering their questions about where mommy was with practiced lies. "She went to see Aunt Rachel. She'll be back soon. Don't worry, sweethearts." For weeks, he even helped with search efforts. When Amanda's disappearance was finally reported by concerned friends on October 15th, handing out flyers bearing her photo at shopping centers and gas stations, his face the picture of a worried husband, even giving an emotional interview to the local news where he pleaded for Amanda's safe return, tears streaming down his face. An Oscar-worthy performance that made the eventual revelation of his guilt even more shocking to those who believed him. The investigation reached a turning point when forensic analysis of Daniel's 2015 Ford F-150, seized during the search warrant execution, revealed trace soil samples in the truck bed and wheel wells that perfectly matched the unique mineral composition of soil found only in the Willow Creek State Forest area, specifically the southeast quadrant where elevation and vegetation created distinct geological markers. This discovery, combined with GPS data from Daniel's phone showing he'd driven to that exact area on the night of October 12th, staying for approximately 90 minutes between 12:47 a.m. and 2:18 a.m., provided the final piece of the puzzle that led detectives directly to Amanda's grave. Detectives brought Daniel in for a second interview on October 25, 2018, this time armed with overwhelming evidence and a strategy to break his carefully maintained facade. They sat him in interview room B, a small space with gray walls and fluorescent lighting designed to be uncomfortable, with Detective Hartwell taking the lead while Detective Morrison observed, reading Daniel's body language for tells. This time, instead of asking questions, they simply played the tape in front of him, letting his own voice fill the room, watching his reaction as he heard himself confessing to murder, describing details only the killer could know, his voice echoing off the walls of the small room like an accusation from his own soul. His hands shook violently, knuckles white as he gripped the table edge. His face went pale, then flushed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. That's not me, he whispered, but the denial was weak, unconvincing even to himself, his voice cracking on the last word. When Detective Hartwell pressed him about specific phrases he used in the confession, particularly his use of the term, fixing the situation, which former co-workers confirmed was Daniel's favorite euphemism for solving problems, and his mention of the blue tarp from the overhead shelf, a detail he couldn't have known unless he'd actually used it, Daniel broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, his carefully constructed lies collapsing like a house of cards. "I didn't mean it. It was an accident," he muttered repeatedly as officers led him away in handcuffs, still clinging to the narrative that might result in a lesser charge, though everyone in that room knew the premeditation evident in the tape and his subsequent actions proved otherwise. "I loved her. I loved Amanda. Please, my daughters, what will happen to my daughters?" The arrest was made at 6:47 p.m., and Daniel Reeves was formally charged with second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse, with prosecutors already planning to argue for the maximum possible sentence. The discovery of Amanda's remains 3 days later, on October 28, following a coordinated search of the Willow Creek area using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, confirmed everything the tape had revealed. Searchers found her approximately 200 yards off a hiking trail, buried in a shallow grave barely 3 feet deep, covered with forest debris that Daniel had hoped would conceal her forever. The medical examiner's report, released weeks later, revealed blunt force trauma to the skull consistent with being struck by a heavy object, specifically the torque wrench later recovered from Daniel's garage, and traces of industrial cleaning chemicals on her clothing, bleach and ammonia, suggesting Daniel tried to destroy evidence before disposing of her body, though his panic and lack of forensic knowledge meant he left countless traces behind. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented, dwarfing even major national cases due to the unique element of the recorded confession. Leah Monroe, the podcaster who discovered the tape, became both hero and target overnight, praised by law enforcement and Amanda's family for bringing a killer to justice, yet harassed online by conspiracy theorists who accused her of fabricating evidence or profiting from tragedy. "I still hear his voice sometimes," she told CNN in a tearful interview, her voice trembling, dark circles under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "That kind of evil doesn't fade from your mind. I can't listen to my own podcast anymore without thinking about that night, without hearing Daniel's confession echoing in my head." Online, the hashtag the tape confession trended for months, accumulating over 2.3 million tweets, with millions of people sharing clips, theories, and reenactments, amateur sleuths dissecting every word of the confession, psychologists offering analysis of Daniel's mental state, and true crime communities debating whether he subconsciously wanted to be caught. Some even questioned whether Daniel wanted to be caught, recording the tape as his way of seeking punishment, a theory supported by several forensic psychologists who noted that leaving the recorder with the tape inside at a thrift shop suggested either remarkable carelessness or a deep psychological need for confession and consequences. The trial that followed, beginning March 15, 2019, drew national and international attention, with court TV broadcasting full coverage and reporters from major networks camping outside the Fairview County Courthouse. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Patricia Williams, built an overwhelming case combining physical evidence, digital forensics, witness testimony, and most damning of all, Daniel's own recorded confession. When the full 18-minute recording was played in court on March 20th, The courtroom fell into shocked silence, several spectators leaving in tears, and the jury sat transfixed by horror as Daniel's voice filled the space, describing Amanda's murder in graphic detail, his matter-of-fact tone somehow more disturbing than if he'd sounded emotional or remorseful. When the jury heard Daniel say, "I watched the light leave her eyes, and for a moment I felt relief that the screaming had stopped," several jurors reportedly wept openly, and even the judge paused proceedings to compose himself. The defense, led by public defender Michael Chin, no relation to Officer Chin, argued temporary insanity, claiming Daniel's mental state had collapsed after years of what they characterized as emotional abuse from Amanda, citing testimony from Daniel's mother and brother about arguments they'd witnessed. They brought in a psychiatrist who diagnosed Daniel with major depressive disorder and claimed he experienced a dissociative episode during the murder, but the evidence of premeditation, the cleanup, the burial, the elaborate lies, was too overwhelming to support an insanity defense. After a grueling 3-week trial that featured 37 witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence, and testimony from forensic experts, Amanda's grieving family, and even Daniel's traumatized daughters, via closed-circuit testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching a verdict. On April 5, 2019 at 3:15 p.m., the foreman announced guilty on all counts, and the courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and anguish, Amanda's sister Rachel collapsing in sobs while Daniel sat motionless, staring at his hands, finally confronting the reality he could no longer escape. Daniel Reeves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 15 years for evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse, sentences to run consecutively, ensuring he would die in prison. In a rare statement during sentencing on April 22, 2019, Judge Robert Martinez addressed Daniel directly. "Your confession was not courage, it was cowardice masked as remorse. You did not confess to seek justice for your wife, but to relieve your own guilty conscience, and even then, you hid the evidence and lied to those who loved Amanda. You have shown this court nothing but calculated cruelty, and you will spend the rest of your life contemplating the evil you committed." Outside the courthouse, Amanda's sister Rachel spoke tearfully to assembled media, flanked by family members wearing buttons bearing Amanda's smiling face. "We finally have peace knowing Daniel will never hurt anyone again, but no justice can bring Amanda back. She should be here watching her daughters grow up, teaching art, living her life. Instead, she's gone, and our family has a hole that will never be filled." The girls, now living with Rachel and her husband, were shielded from cameras, their identities protected by court order, their lives forever altered by their father's unforgivable act. The tape was later released to the public after the trial concluded, following extensive legal debate about public interest versus decency, and despite warnings about its disturbing content, it drew 47 million views within 48 hours across various platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, and countless true crime websites. People around the world were haunted by Daniel's trembling voice, the sound of guilt that refused to stay buried, and the confession became one of the most analyzed pieces of audio in true crime history, studied by criminologists, psychologists, and amateur sleuths trying to understand the mind of a killer who recorded his own downfall. For Fairview, Oregon, the case became a grim reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, that the neighbor who waves from his driveway, the father coaching youth soccer, the mechanic who fixes your car with a friendly smile might harbor darkness that only emerges in moments of rage and poor judgment. The town struggled with the aftermath, some residents moving away to escape the association, others founding support groups for families affected by domestic violence, and the Fairview Community Center established the Amanda Reeves Memorial Fund to support domestic violence awareness and prevention programs. In the aftermath, Leah Monroe's podcast Cold Case Chronicles surged in popularity, gaining over 500,000 new subscribers within weeks of the case breaking, but the success felt hollow and tainted by trauma. She continued producing episodes for another year, but her heart was no longer in it, every episode reminding her of that October night when innocent curiosity led to discovering genuine evil. She retired from podcasting in October 2019, exactly 1 year after finding the tape, citing trauma and an inability to continue covering cases that once fascinated her but now only triggered painful memories. Every time I hear static, she said in a final interview with Rolling Stone magazine, I think of that night and the voice that confessed by accident. I helped catch a killer, but I lost myself in the process. The old Sony TCM 200DV cassette recorder now sits locked away in the Fairview Police Department evidence room, stored in a sealed plastic bag labeled only Case File Number 1189, the tape that broke the internet. Officers who worked the case occasionally walk past it during evidence reviews, and every one of them reports feeling a chill, knowing what that innocuous device contains, how one object could hold such concentrated evil and serve as the voice of the dead, speaking Amanda's truth when she could no longer speak for herself. And to this day, people wonder, armchair detectives debate online, true crime podcasts revisit the case, documentaries explore every angle. If Leah hadn't pressed play that October evening, if she'd tested the recorder with a blank tape first, if she'd never stopped at Harbor Thrift, would Daniel Reeves still be walking free, attending his daughter's school events, helping neighbors with car trouble, living his double life indefinitely? Would Amanda's body ever have been found, or would she have remained one of the thousands of missing persons whose cases grow cold and fade from memory? This chilling case remains one of the most disturbing examples of how truth sometimes reveals itself in the most unexpected ways. Proof that, in a world filled with secrets, even a forgotten cassette can become a voice for the dead, and sometimes justice comes not from brilliant detective work but from sheer chance, a $12 purchase at a thrift shop, and one person's willingness to listen to a voice that needed to be heard. The story refuses to end, living on in countless retellings, a cautionary tale about the masks people wear, the violence that can erupt in seemingly normal lives, and the strange ways that truth insists on emerging from darkness, even when buried in shallow graves and hidden on forgotten tapes, waiting for the moment when someone presses play and the dead finally get to tell their story.
Welcome to Hidden Files, where every crime has a story, and every story hides the truth.